gun too, and both started to shoot in unison. Lieutenant Murphy was shot in the throat and immediately dove for cover behind a parked car. The bullet had struck him in the jog bone and traveled down his throat, tearing his voice box and esophagus open before bouncing on the spine.
And just as I had started moving, I saw him. White t-shirt, lots of ink on his arms, black tactical pants, and a holster on his hip. We both shot probably at the same time. My shot missed, and he hit me directly in the chin, which traveled down my throat and ripped apart my larynx.
Despite these severe injuries, Lieutenant Murphy kneeled to scan the parking lot underneath the cars. He was trying to locate Brad, who was not hit by the bullet shot his way. Unable to catch sight of the shooter from ground level, Lieutenant Murphy rose, cautiously scanning the surrounding area for the shooter. As soon as he was fully standing, Lieutenant Murphy turned, and the devastating reality hit. The shooter was right behind him, weapon at the ready, which he started to fire, striking Lieutenant Murphy in the hand, causing him to lose grip on his own gun. The lieutenant slumped to the ground between an SUV and another car and curled into the fetal position, covering his face with his backside facing outwards.
I stood up, pointed my gun, and that's when he shot the tip of my thumb off. The gun came out of my hand.
He was unarmed, gravely injured, and out of places to take cover. The shooter walked up to within inches of Lieutenant Brian Murphy and began shooting again, hitting him 15 times in all. Only 3 of the bullets fired hit Lieutenant Murphy's bulletproof vest, although the vest no doubt saved the lieutenant's life. Apparently this didn't seem sufficient, for Brad added insult to injury, shooting him once more in the back of the head. This last shot knocked the lieutenant out for a brief period. Moments later, Officer Sam Lenda arrived on the scene, pulling into the temple's parking lot, straight into a madman, a guy who was shooting with abandon, including at the patrol vehicle. Officer Lenda backed up, exited his patrol car, and started to fire back, using a department-issued rifle. Officer Lenda was a trained sniper, even teaching other officers shooting skills, so when he fired, it struck Brad in the hip, which caused the bones to shatter, and Brad fell to the ground and attempted to crawl backward. When that was futile, he raised his gun and shot himself in the head, dying instantly. The responding police officers heard that unmistakable last shot and knew, without seeing it, that the shooter was dead. Officer Lenda cautiously approached the area where Brad was last seen. Once located, he walked up and covered Brad and simultaneously kicked the gun out of his hand, just in case he wasn't truly dead. This next audio clip was taken from Officer Lenda's patrol vehicle camera and body-worn microphone. The audio quality is not very clear, but you will be able to hear Officer Lenda tell dispatch he located the shooter, as well as gunshots. You can also hear Officer Lenda tell the shooter to drop his weapon multiple times before the unmistakable alert of shots fired.
Five, I got someone walking out the driveway towards me. I thought I heard shots. Can you confirm that? I got a man with a gun in the parking lot. Drop the gun! 68123. 1468. That's a big tempo, correct? That's affirmative, 75 to Ohio. Drop the gun! Drop the gun! Man with the gun sir.
At this point, it began to dawn on the rest of the police officers that they didn't know where Lieutenant Murphy was. Officers began searching and calling out on their radios, praying for any sort of response. The lieutenant could hear the radio chatter, but he could not speak because his throat was damaged from the bullet. What compounded the problem even further was that he was concealed in between cars. The lieutenant knew this was his last chance, and he crawled, on his knees, barely moving, hands in the air, dripping blood. This display of human strength shows the fantastic lengths one can go to save themselves in the face of such adversity. Once he cleared the vehicles that were earlier his shields, Lieutenant Murphy was immediately noticed by his colleagues, who rushed to his side to begin rendering aid. Lieutenant Murphy tried to speak, but he could only manage to sputter out blood and foam because of the injuries. It was unbelievable that he was alive. Because there were so many 911 calls, providing conflicting stories, officers were not positive that the threat was eliminated. Moreover, it was unclear whether there was another active shooter. Still, once officers discovered the lieutenant's condition, they knew they needed to triage him as much as possible, while several officers tried to provide cover. Once they were able, Lieutenant Murphy was placed in the back of a patrol car where his vest was removed. Officers were stunned when bullets started to fall out of the vest. Despite the grim injuries he was obviously suffering from, Lieutenant Murphy was only intent on ensuring his officers remained calm and made good decisions.
It wasn't minor injuries that he had. He had some pretty severe injuries, and he was still waving off the officers to go take care of the other wounded.
As previously mentioned, the 911 calls were numerous, but very unclear on exact information. Loud noises and language barriers were just a few of the examples of how the 911 calls were somewhat distorted in some cases. A few of the victims hiding inside the temple telephoned family back in India, telling them where they were hiding so families could, in turn, call for help. Just before noon on August 5th, the SWAT team entered the temple and escorted the uninjured people outside. A nearby bowling alley, Class Lanes, was set up as a reunification center. Still, it also doubled as a makeshift interview room for police to talk to witnesses, trying to understand what happened. Interpreters arrived at the bowling alley to assist victims in giving statements to the police investigators. 84-year-old Suveg Katra was born on June 6, 1928 in Ambala, state of Haryana in India. The eldest shooting victim, Suveg, came from a large family that included 3 brothers and 3 sisters. His family made a living in India by farming, and in 2004 he immigrated to America with his wife. They planned to live with their son and daughter-in-law. Sadly, his wife passed in 2010, leaving this world only a few short years before her beloved. Suveg maintained a fundamental role at the temple, offering uplifting scripture passages to those he felt needed them. He was described as a strong and devout man, and punctual to the second. Suveg is survived by 5 children and 7 grandchildren. Satwant Kaleka was born on June 2, 1947, in Patiala, in the state of Punjab, India. The 65-year-old was extremely close with his family that included 9 brothers and sisters. Growing up in India, he came from a farming family, immigrating to the United States in 1982 with his wife and 2 sons. They emigrated from India after Satwant was sponsored by an older brother, who was a vet in Wisconsin. Upon arriving in America, Satwant began to work long hours at a nearby gas station, earning an income for his family. He worked hard and saved everything, eventually purchasing his own gas station in 1987. One of the founding families of the Sikh temple, he served as leader and president from inception to his death. Satwant is survived by his wife and 2 sons. Ranjit Singh was 49 years old when he was killed. Born on April 4, 1963 in Daluwala, Punjab, India, he grew up with 2 brothers and 2 sisters. After finishing school, Ranjit moved to New Delhi, immigrating to the States in 1997. His job was at the temple, but Ranjit also worked odd jobs during the week to send money back to his extended family in India. Ranjit's primary goal in life was to provide a bright future for his family. He worked hard and would do anything for them. Everyone that knew him will remember his humble, dedicated nature. Ranjit is survived by his wife and 3 children. 41-year-old Sita Singh was born on November 15, 1970, and was the youngest brother of Ranjit. After completing school, Sita also moved to New Delhi, India, before immigrating to the United States in 1995. Before coming to the U.S., Sita also lived in Canada and England. When he arrived in America, he lived in New York City and eventually moved to Wisconsin about 6 months before the shooting. A devout Sikh, Sita performed all duties at the temple, including cooking, maintenance, and daily services. His passions were reading and music. Sita is survived by his wife and 4 children. The only woman killed in the shooting was 41-year-old Paramjit Kaur. Born on April 25, 1971, she immigrated to the United States in 2004. She deeply missed her family in India, though, and had returned from a trip with her sons there recently before the shooting. It was her very first trip home since coming to the States. Paramjit attended the temple each Sunday and Thursday. As important as her religion was, Paramjit valued education and sought to provide her sons the best educational opportunities available. She was incredibly selfless, always putting her husband and sons' needs above her own. Paramjit is survived by her husband and 2 sons. 39-year-old Prakash Singh was born in New Delhi, India on November 1, 1972. Growing up, he had 4 brothers and a sister and immigrated to the United States in 2005. Prakash was the priest at the temple for about 7 years leading up to his untimely death. In early 2012, he received his green card, and later that year, in June, he took a trip back to India with his family, including his wife, son, and daughter. An industrious and caring man, he moved his family into a new apartment only a week before the shooting. Prakash is survived by his wife and children. Baba Singh was 72 years old when he died. Born in Pakistan on August 11, 1947, and deceased on March 2, 2020, Baba was shot in the head on that fateful day in 2012. He sustained an anoxic brain injury that left him paralyzed, with a permanent trach and living in a nursing home. At the time of his death, the medical examiner ruled that Baba's manner of death was a homicide due to complications from a gunshot wound to the head. He suffered several complications immediately following the shooting, slipping into a coma and enduring 2 strokes. He was nearly always bedridden and suffered from sores and infections as a result. Baba was a visiting religious leader from India when he was shot. His life in India included establishing schools for poor and orphan children. He also came from a family of farmers who were forced from their homes during the 1947 partition. They lived in Punjab, India, and Baba eventually joined the Indian Army as a Sikh preacher, serving during the Indo-Pakistani Wars in 1965 and 1971. Baba taught in the military for 19 years, philosophy, and history. It is beyond devastating to consider all this man has endured in one lifetime. He is survived by his wife and 2 sons.
Active shooter, reports of an active shooter,
mass casualty incidents.
active shooter, reports of an active shooter,
mass casualty incidents.